It costs nothing to play, but I got something to say. Time for nanDEMOnai. For this nanDEMOnai, we're checking out the demo for Over the Hills and Far Away. It looks like an adventure game, and involves Britain somehow. Well, the UK, technically. But, yeah, let's do this. New game. When it comes your time to die, be not like those whose hearts are filled with the fear of death, so that when their time comes, they weep and pray for a little more time to live their lives over again in a different way. Sing your life, etc., so forth. As mentioned by Tecumseh. Northwestern frontier, like in the U.S. The sky is dark, and the sleet is cold. These empty lands are wild and windswept. My journey will be a harsh one, and there's no guarantee I'll come out of it the same. An eagle circles high above before flying south, caught on the updrafts of the wind. As the rain falls all around, I trudge through the mud and frost, searching for shelter. Oh, that's bad. Alone in the wilderness, I pass through the long grass of a battlefield. Redcoats and bluecoats lie in the dirt, their corpses sinking into the mud beneath. Their rifles stand, upended, pointing toward the sky. Oh, is this about around the War of 1812? Sweet! Nobody does that war. It was a terrible war. I don't think the war itself is sweet, but finally a game set in a war that nobody ever does a game in. Well, Assassin's Creed might have played around with that. I don't know when their games around Assassin's Creed 3 exactly took place, but whatever. Anyway. A cheap substitute for a headstone. A waste of guns, if you ask me. Counting the bodies, I guess it must have been an ambush or a small engagement. Perhaps prisoners of war on their way to an American encampment. Maybe they were fellow deserters on their way south. I continue to walk past the brambles and puddles, deeper into the battlefield. Moss and weeds stick to my boots, and the sodden earth sucks my feet down onto the surface. Passing corpse after corpse, I casually glance over their bodies for rations or supplies. But luck is not on my side. These soldiers were already stripped of their goods before being left to rot in the sleet. Slowly, I come to a halt on a small hillock at the edge of a field. The rain continues to pelt down from above. Should I keep going from here? Wherever here is? The further I push south, the less chance I have of returning. I look back across the valley. Our last orders to retreat didn't leave us with many clues. Burlington. Something about Burlington. The men retreating were headed for the British encampment there. I stand for a few moments, staring into the distance. And the game burps for a second. Oh, here we go. We're loading. I'm William Aubrey of the 41st Regiment of Foot. Following the last engagement to the north of the Thames River, I fled southwest and crossed the Detroit River. Now, deep into enemy territory, I'm headed south for Michigan territory. Where I go from here, I cannot say. If the British were to find me here as I am now, I'd certainly be shot for treason. Living in the woods, a coward and traitor to the crown. I've kept my head down so far, and journeyed from shelter to shelter. Scavenging like a common mongrel, I've had no choice but to rob and trespass. I should keep moving. There's no way for me to return back now. If I'm to desert, I should keep running for as long as I can. Perhaps I can find an American regiment looking for new recruits. No, I'm done with fighting. It's not a life I can return to. I have no business being a soldier any longer. I have no love for the old king or for the new republic. I only wish to find my own place to call home, to be a free man and to find my fortune. After all, what is there to win here? Glory? Freedom? Land? There are no spoils of war for cannon fodder. Either left to rot as a prisoner of war, or to hang, or made to fight under men like Proctor again. I'll take my chances as a free man any day. I begin walking again, my boots slowly becoming caked in mud and slime. As I head through the valleys, I eventually sight a small barn in the middle of a field. I like the change of view looking up into the rain. Seemingly abandoned, I begin trudging toward it at a hurried pace. After living in the wilderness for nearly a week, I could use some shelter. Absent-mindedly, I rest a hand on my shoulder as I walk and feel the wound there. Shot in the woods during that last engagement, I was hit by musket fire. I barely noticed it after the first few days, but it's beginning to bleed more after sleeping in the mud. Soon enough, I come to a stop outside the old barn. The dirty shack is barely standing, but I can smell the dry hay inside. It'll do, for now. Looking at the timber door, I reach toward the handle but stop short of gripping it. There's a small rope hooked around a metal rung, tying the door to the barn wall. Knife. Reaching into my boot, I grip at the concealed blade and pull it out. I turn the dirty weapon over in my hand, examining the broken handle. Then, I slowly saw out the rope until the thin string breaks in two. Replacing the knife in my boot, a thought strikes me. I'm probably on someone's land here. Anybody could be inside this barn. An American soldier with a rifle, a native rebel with a tomahawk, or a farmer, angry with me for trespassing on his land. I let the strap of my musket fall down over my shoulder, and I take the weapon in my hands. It's best to be prepared for these things, after all. I move forward and begin to pull at the barn door, prying it open. Leaning up against the wooden frame, I grip at the handle and pull. Slowly, the timber board begins to shift. As the barn door swings open, I quickly stumble inside into the musty shelter. My eyes take a few seconds to adjust to the darkness. Hello. You are... Once they do, I'm confronted with a strange sight. Instinctively, I raise the barrel of my musket and take a defensive stance. Is it even loaded? It seems to be a short young girl, a native child. She can't be of much threat, but looks can be very deceiving. As I continue to hold my weapon towards her, I take a closer look. She wears a blue headband decorated with native art. The shawl over her shoulders is a matching tone, while her dress is comprised of more earthy colors. Dark, black hair is braided on each side into pigtails and tied at the ends with large button-like discs. The eyes, a caramel color, give away little as to what she's thinking. She appears to be around 11 or 12 years old. The art's really good, too. I like this. Like, the earlier shot of him as a soldier, not that it didn't betray much, but this is solid. Although it can be hard to tell with them. Racist! Her posture is loose, relaxed. She doesn't seem scared at all. Even though I'm currently pointing a musket at her, the little girl does nothing. Not crying, not running, not smiling. She simply stares at me like a fool. The bushy eyebrows and button nose round off the picture, giving her a rather tomboyish look. I take a step forward, the tip of my musket's bayonet hovering near to her chest. Watching for her reaction, I cautiously make a shooing gesture. Shoot! Scram! But she doesn't move. So I take another step, this time bringing the weapon even closer towards her. Again, she doesn't move. I wait a few seconds to see if anything has occurred to her. And I skip a line of text because my mouse is a piece of crap. The girl only stares at me, as though I were nothing more than a stray animal. Her expression carries no malice, only an unblinking curiosity. The situation is hopeless. Giving up on trying to intimidate her, I stand to full attention and let the musket hang over my shoulder by its strap. I take a look around the barn. Straw lies trampled into an earth floor, with enough left over to make for comfortable bedding. The ground looks somewhat firm, but puddles have formed in places. Thick beams above support a thin roof of wooden paneling, barely keeping the thunderstorm out. Water drops leak from holes in the slats, confirming that the place hasn't been maintained for some time. The door on the opposite wall has been ripped off its hinges, giving the full view of the wind and rain outside. What a dump. Old dusty crates and boxes are piled up against one side of the shelter, along with several curious items. Vases of various designs, rolled up carpets, old parchment, a broken sundial, glass bottles. The former owner probably dumped most of their worthless possessions and made for a safer area. Turning back to the small Indian girl, I ponder aloud. A young native girl on her own in wild territory in a barn during a storm. Maybe she's an idiot child? This guy's a dick. You hear stories of white parents abandoning their kids in the wilderness, not wanting the burden of raising a less than bright child. I don't think natives did it too. She'd have to be an idiot not to be scared of a soldier with a gun. Dude, you're like half dead. Whatever, dude. Her curious glance holds. I come even closer, this time standing right next to her. Looking her up and down, I mutter to myself. A Shawnee girl? Shawnee. Yeah! I fell backwards onto my arse. landing with a squelchy plop in the mud. Her response took me by complete surprise. I didn't expect her to speak back. That's why this guy doesn't talk to humans much, does he? Slowly getting up off the ground, I brushed the straw and dirt off my backside. You're Shawnee? Nothing. Did you hear me? Again, nothing. Then Nawe Nila. I guess that's confirmation. Nawe Nila. That means I am Shawnee, I think. Only know so much of the language from my regiment's time with them. Forget the Indian speak. You know English? No response. Right. I rest one hand on the butt of my musket, but she doesn't break eye contact. What are you doing out here? She gives me a curious glance before pointing through the opening to the stormy outside. Papa Panawe. What? She continues to point as the rain falls outside. It begins to dawn to me that what she means without hearing her saying it. I'm waiting for the storm to end. Many years ago, this continent was racked by a bloody and destructive war. I was only a boy at the time. Father brought me to America from England to find his fortune. He didn't know of the rebellion that was brewing, the impending revolts and battles. While he worked his trade, the mobs grew ugly and a war began. Redcoats and bluecoats fought to control these lands. Father continued to struggle on for my sake. One day he disappeared, either pressed into some militia or murdered for his royalist tendencies. I was taken in by our neighbors. An American family, too Christian to allow a child to suffer on the streets of Boston. I grew into a young man surrounded by blood, rhetoric, and ruin. As the war raged on, I lost interest in the straight and narrow path. I sought to expand my riches by less legitimate means and set out on my own. For a while I partnered with a Yankee, a criminal, much like I was in those days. A lout named Warren Jackson. Like a serpent, he seduced me into a life of wickedness. While people fought for their independence, we took a much less noble approach to our pursuit of happiness. We started small, robbing the homes and townhouses of deceased militia and politicians. The revolution brought a lot of hurt and chaos to these lands. Many men lost their titles and possessions then, as towns were raided and sieged. No effective government, rival militia, and the British expelled. It was a new kind of paradise for criminals. My partner and I grew fat on our robbed riches, throwing it away on drink and women. Some years after the war ended, a crackdown on independent spirits like us began. Man was promised land and freedom if he fought for independence, but the new republic wasn't much different from the old. We took up arms at times, rioting against new taxes on our whiskey. They wanted to repress our sin and fine us for our well-earned spoils. This wasn't a new anarchic world. It still belonged to the landowners of before. So my partner set up at a northern trading post and wrote me, asking I join him. For months we lived no better than wild men, hunting and tracking, and offering our services. Family, out in the wilderness, needed guides to protect them from natives and wolves. You find many frontier folk like that, desperate to be free men, to find a plot of land to call their own. Gullible and weak, most of them, but they paid well enough. Some would reach their destinations to colonize, to spread the word of our good business. Most weren't so lucky. My partner and I would lead them off the trail to some desolate patch of wilderness. Then we'd beat them, rob them blind, and leave them to the wolves. Okay, guy's a dick. It was a bad time for most, in those early days after the revolution. We didn't much care for morality then. Time passed, we slowly filled our coin purses. But the booze lost its taste, and the women, well, I lost my appetite for stealing from folk who had nothing. I wanted out. My partner, he was less than happy about the idea. That went well. We fought and fought for days, many times drawing our pistols and blades. Eventually, we and called it quits. As we went our separate ways, my partner turned to me and called out, "I'll be seeing you soon." After that, he disappeared into the brush. I never heard from him again. We split the loot, and I made for port in England, turning my back on the New World forever. I was finished with this continent. It was time for me to find a small patch and a peaceful life. At least, I hoped it would be that simple. I like how it kind of jumps back to how he got into the war and everything. It's kind of neat. And now we're back at the barn. I sit on one side of the barn, leaning up against a wooden post. After living across the open countryside for miles, I need to catch my breath. I don't have the energy to deal with that. The young girl stays where she is, staring at me. Why couldn't this place be abandoned? All I wanted was some rest from the rain. This caramel free irises lock onto me. Barely shifting as she takes in the sight. What? She doesn't respond. So the gist I'm getting here, it's the whole... She ends up coming with you after you leave the barn, and then you learn to keep an eye out for her, mend your former ways, or maybe you don't. I don't know. I don't know how many options are in this. But I like this. I like the fact that they went with a setting in a war that doesn't get much coverage, and the art's pretty good. Feels a little more vibrant than your average visual novel. And I love that there's no real menu bar at the bottom. I mean, there's that menu at the top the entire time, which kind of distracting, takes you out of it, but there's not like the text box. It's just that the semi-transparent bar there. I like that. I like that a lot. It doesn't make it entirely clear who's speaking some of the time. You gotta watch for the alternate font for the character name, but other than that, it was a nice way to handle it, so you get to see more of the art and whatnot, and or save on window box designs. Anyway, cool little game, Over the Hills and Far Away. This is a demo. It's on Steam, and I am going to give that a hearty recommend, and probably get around to it eventually. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, let me know in the comments, and consider subscribing so you get videos like this on the regular. I put up a lot of stuff every day. If you help me out on Patreon using the link in the upper corner, you can help me put out even more. You can also check me out on Twitter with the username on the lower right, or swing by my website, nanDEMOnai.com, for all sorts of content, written, video, and otherwise, that I do regarding gaming.